Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. We're streaming live our season finale, calendar year finale, obviously. My name is Matt Baker, coming to you live on YouTube, on streaming. We're going to start the podcast recording in just a minute. Would love if everybody who is joining participated in our chat. If you have any questions, fire away. Happy to answer anything you might have. It's just going to be me today. So we'll get started in just a minute. And I'm playing with some new features here. So there's a little countdown thing that we're going to work on for next year. Kind of playing around with that in between the holidays. So that's what that was if you just saw a little countdown pop up. So now we're going to start the recording. If you have any questions, like I said, pop them in the chat. Happy to answer them as we finish off 2024. Let's have a little fun. Let's do this. Give a little city info and city talk during the holidays. Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy, sponsored by Noble Ice Vineyards. I'm your host, Matt Baker, and I'm here for our final episode of 2024. After nearly 100 or so episodes this calendar year, we are bidding adieu to 2024 with a pretty packed episode. I don't know how long this is really going to go. We'll see if we make it 30, 40, 60 minutes like we usually do, but we have quite a bit to talk about. Phil Grooms handled the Super Draft look. If you didn't get a chance to listen or watch that, his interview with SLU men's soccer head coach Kevin Kalish on our last episode was a massive deep dive into the Super Draft. So we'll touch a little bit on that to recap and make sure everybody is up to speed on who we selected. But the majority of this episode, we're going to look at the 2025 schedule because we haven't done that yet on Flyover Footy, and that's a nice pivot into next year for something to look forward to. We're going to go into general allocation money. A little pet project of my own for years has been trying to understand MLS roster mechanisms and make them more understandable, because I have a firm belief that the more you know about the sport, the more you know about the league, the more fun you'll have, the more you understand everything. It's not unlike a lot of the crazy baseball rules, but we are so accustomed to those that things like GAM and TAM and DPs, U22s, all that stuff, we talk about them all the time on Flyover Footy, but they still go over people's heads for good reason. I have to sit down and focus on those in order to make them make sense to me. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that because MLS did a very un-MLS-y type thing and gave us details into GAM. So we're going to go into that a little bit more. If you have any questions, if you're joining us on our live stream chat, you can drop those in at that segment, especially because I do want to make sure that we cover that as in-depth as possible, while obviously still making it easy to understand. And then talk a little bit about our kits. And I think that's how we're going to start this one. Let's dive right into kit talk. As I record this on Boxing Day, December 26th, the day after Christmas, our friends over at Footy Headlines have given us the first look, or at least first information and more in details on the new 2025 St. Louis City SC home kits. And as we've talked plenty of times on this show about, and if you've stopped me in person, I've gone on about the development cycle of these kits. MLS and Adidas are on 2-year cycles with their kits. That means every 2 years, a kit is refreshed, a jersey, a kit, whatever. I'm probably going to call it kit more often than not, but it's refreshed. Every team will roll out a new home or away kit every single year. Some teams get third kits, alternate kits. That's usually based off of jersey sales. You sell, I think the last metric I saw was 100,000 kits, and then you are on docket for an alternate. That number might have changed, so don't quote me on that necessarily. But there is a metric that Adidas and MLS use in who they're willing to give these third kits out to. But every single year, a home and away kit is more or less cycled. There are some exceptions here and there where a team might refresh a kit for a specific reason, an anniversary or something else. But for all intents and purposes, and for City especially, we're on 2-year cycles. The first year, we used a brand new, what I'm wearing on the live stream, the City Red home kit That lasted us for 2 years. When we first rolled out in 2023, we used an older version for our away kit, those gray ones. That was refreshed last year in the Confluence kit. And now this year, we're getting a new one. According to the sources they have at Footy Headlines, they said, quote, a reliable source said that the Adidas St. Louis City SC 2025 home jersey will have an embossed diagonal stripe design, and the primary color would most likely remain pink. They did not have any confirmations or details further than that. They didn't have any concept designs, but they did include in their article that the new kit would be available in February 2025. So barring a massive leak, which would be very uncity-like, we may have to wait quite a bit longer before seeing how this embossed diagonal stripe design actually looks. And as I was talking to some people on social media, probably a good idea not to get too bogged down in the plainness of what that sounds like. There are templates that Adidas and MLS use. There are designs that will be shared across teams. There's a design down the side that has been leaked on Sporting KC and the San Diego FC kit that is likely to have some kind of semblance. So you'll have some of the trims that look consistent. But I think just saying we're going to have diagonal lines down our kit that are reminiscent of the arch pattern on the first kit, I think that's a little too plain, too ordinary. I would very much be erring on the side of our team knows the value of a kit. They know the value in uniqueness. And I have no doubt that it's going to be very much more than just diagonal river blue stripes on a city red kit. But we'll find out more about that in February. I'm loving the concept designs that I've seen already. A lot of people think that we may be doing something in homage to the 1950 World Cup team that had multiple players from St. Louis and from the Hill on that roster, and a little homage in the 75th anniversary to celebrate that team and those players from St. Louis and from the Hill, and maybe make it sash-ish. So there's a lot of potential out there to kind of pull things back, and we'll see what we'll see what the club comes up with, because I'm just convinced it's going to be more than just plain diagonal stripes. That is not the MO of this club. Rest easy if you were me and I was giving advice. Rest easy, knowing that it'll be something a little bit more that will pop, that'll stand out a little bit more than that. Beyond that, lately it's been the Super Draft and it's been schedules. And the Super Draft, like I said from the onset, Phil Grooms did a massive job in landing Kevin Kalish interview that went deep into not just the players that St. Louis selected, but also the Super Draft process itself. Kalish was on boots on the ground of the college combine, or the college showcase, as it's officially called, that gave a lot of these players and coaches time to showcase their talents, to scout out who was available in the Super Draft. It's a fascinating process, in as much as this has gone down in its notoriety over the past few years, and has been trending down as far as MLS, the value of the Super Draft, the value of all these the players coming out of college. There has been much less emphasis by teams on scouting talent and using talent from the Super Draft to immediately make an impact in your team because of academies, because of homegrowns. But it's still value. Value can still be found there. And so we hope that the 2025 edition of this will garner value for St. Louis, because for the first time, St. Louis selected 3 players in their 3 rounds. There were no trades for GAM. There were no trades out of their slots. They selected players, to the surprise and to the excitement of the fan base. And so who are those players? Well, like I said, Phil went deep with Kevin on the players and what Kevin Kalish saw from them and what their value to St. Louis is. But let's give a quick recap of who they are, just in case you didn't listen to that entire episode. Emil Yakas. Yeah, I'm going to butcher this name again. It's going to take some time to get used to this. Emil Yakislanen, Joey Zielinski, and Colin Welsh. So first round, 7th overall pick was Emil Yaskalainen from the University of Akron. He's a striker. The second round, our 37th overall pick, saw Joey Zielinski from Rutgers go. He's a fullback, a right back by trade. And goalkeeper Colin Welsh from Western Michigan University was the 3rd round selection by City, 67th overall. Now, looking at some of these players and trying to figure out what the expectation is going to be, well, Yaskalainen, I think, is an out-and-out striker. In City's press release, they touted his recorded NCAA best 23 goals and 8 assists in 21 matches for Akron in 2024, marking the second highest single season goal tally in that university's history. Jaskalainen was selected as the unanimous Big East Offensive Player of the Year, first team All Big East selection, and a finalist for the Mac Hermann Trophy. The winner obviously announced in St. Louis on January 3rd. And before joining Akron, Jaskalainen scored 43 goals for Long Island University. He was accolades and awards galore there. So he's a proven goal scorer at the collegiate level. Now, will that translate immediately to the MLS level? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but the potential is there. And scouting details that Analysis Evolved, the American Soccer Analysis website, at Analysis Evolved on X, that they put together puts Jaskalainen in some pretty elite company when it comes to finishing. He was highly ranked for finishing. He's pretty highly ranked in unlocking for other players and what he can do off the ball. His off the ball proactive and reactive metrics are pretty high. I think there's a lot of possibilities, and he was a consensus first round player. So this is a player that I think is the one to watch, not just because he was in the first round, but because the St. Louis striker room is a little unknown at this point. We do have depth, but the depth is young. And so Jaskalainen is going to have an opportunity to not just make the roster, but also see some minutes in games right off the bat. If he performs, if we see a Jose Kojima type production out of training camp signed and then seeing action immediately because of the fixture congestion, we're not going to have that issue necessarily. And we don't necessarily know the full scope of our tournaments that we're going to be playing next year as I record this on December 26th. But Jaskalainen has the chance. And that's going to be one of the most exciting things to see is how quickly can he make an impact. The second round draft choice went an entirely different way, looking for defense, looking to another area where depth is a question mark at the right back spot, because we have not yet re-signed Jake Nerwinski, even though the last we heard is that we would be renegotiating after his option was declined. Right now, we don't have an out-and-out right back to back up Thomas Totland other than Akil Watts. And Akil Watts can play multiple positions. So will his value be seen at right back, or will it be better utilized at defensive mid or left back? We don't know. But now we have an option in seeing what we have in Joey Zielinski. Zielinski came through the New York Red Bulls Academy pipeline. He was a member of the Red Bulls since 2016, debuting for Red Bulls 2 in September 2020. He had 59 appearances for Rutgers, scoring 2 goals and recording 2 assists. So as a right back in the second round, this is a little bit more of a question mark. You usually see second and third round players signed to MLS Next Pro deals or not signed at all, because that's one thing to keep in mind here is as we talk about Zielinski and Welsh especially, but as we talk about all three of these players, it's important to know that none of them are on Generation Adidas contracts with MLS, which means they sign with the league ahead of time, knowing that they're basically guaranteed to be picked and picked early. None of them have contracts. None of them have deals with either Generation Adidas, MLS, any teams. So they're going to have to earn not just a role on the field, but they're going to have to earn a contract in training camp. More of a, like I said, a theoretical default of sorts that I think about is they are likely to be signed with City 2 unless something catastrophic were to happen. Unless you have some kind of situation where they just aren't panning out in training camp and it's not even worth stashing them, almost a wasted draft pick. It's similar to what Brendan McSorley last year, John Klein the year prior had. And if Jose Kojima was any indication as far as timeline goes and when we would expect to know how these players are falling into the roster in any way, shape, or form, look to the start of the season. Any player who earns a contract needs to be declared as such prior to the roster lock date, which happens a day or two prior to the season starting on February 22nd. And so we will know at that point if any of these players are going to earn first team contracts right off the bat. Now, they can always sign a contract later in the season. There's nothing precluding them from doing so because it's not a transfer situation. You know, last year we saw first team contracts being given mid-season because of necessity. Well, that could happen at this point. So it's just how we start the season and where these players start with St. Louis. We went over Jaskalainen, we went over Zielinski. Colin Welsh is an interesting one, if no other reason than he's a goalkeeper. And we know that the age and the prime age of goalkeepers is vastly different than outfield players. So this is an interesting one that I would be far more pessimistic that he would make the opening day roster on the first team or optimistic that he'd just immediately go to City 2 and see what we have there. Welsh is from Overland Park, Kansas. So he's a Casey native guy. He made 78 saves and posted a record of 11, 3, and 6 for Western Michigan in 2024, earning Missouri Valley Conference Goalkeeper of the Year honors. And before joining Western Michigan, Welsh made 36 appearances for Memphis. He played his undergrad for Memphis before transferring to Western Michigan to complete his senior year. Now, Welsh, in a crowded, if not spectacular, goalkeeping room as far as what we've seen developmentally so far from City, looks to be able to find his spot somewhere with City 2, competing with other players that have come up through the academy pipeline, and also City players as well. Ben Lunt, Christian Oliveras, those players who need to see minutes and are signed to first team contracts now. That's a crowded room. So finding time for all these goalkeepers is going to be a storyline to follow on the City 2 level that Welsh will no doubt be a part of. So I mentioned the roster lock date is coming in February 20th, 21st or so, because the season is going to start on February 22nd. That was the other big thing that really broke since we last recorded, and even right before Phil's interview with Kevin Kalish, is the 2025 schedule was released. So let's dig into that a little bit. Let's look at the home schedules. Let's look at the away schedules and some overall notes. And we'll start with what's happening first. Colorado Rapids are coming to Energizer Park. Almost messed that one. Colorado Rapids come to Energizer Park on February 22nd for a 7:30 p.m. kickoff to open the 2025 MLS season for St. Louis City SC. St. Louis will travel after that to San Diego. This is one of the ones that we knew about for a few weeks because San Diego publicized it. Saturday, March 1st, a 9:30 p.m. local start time in St. Louis. St. Louis will play at San Diego to open their home season. This is an interesting start to the season because St. Louis will be in the spotlight early on, and as well as having the opportunity to open their season against Stan Kroenke. So Stan Kroenke's team, rather, in the Colorado Rapids, whether he remembers that he owns them or not, that's debatable, but I think it'll be fun for all St. Louis City fans to get into that and use that as a little fuel to the fire of this rivalry, because it's going to be a tough one. Colorado was a good team in 2024, and so it's going to be a difficult match to open the season, very much a measuring stick to see how well St. Louis can carry over their relative success that was at the end of 2024 into the 2025 season. From there, you look to see what are some highlights of this. And I think MLS overall has done a fairly good job with this schedule. League-wide, there are more afternoon games, there are more Sunday games, and there are fewer midweek games. All positive things when you're talking about some of the biggest concerns that fans had on what the MLS schedule was prior, where you're talking about this congested schedule on Saturday nights, every single team playing almost at the exact same time, making it impossible to keep up with the rest of the league live in any meaningful manner. They've addressed that a little bit. So you have more of these like focused game of the week type things on Saturday at 1:30 and 3:30 in the afternoon, as well as some Sunday games. And St. Louis is impacted by that. So if you look at the schedule breakdown, we have, of our 34 games, 26 of them will be played on Saturdays, 12 home and 14 away. 6 will be played on Sunday with 3 home and 3 away. 2 Wednesday games, both home. 5 game of the week matches, all on Sunday, 2 home, 3 away as far as the focus MLS gives. And then you have a little bit of a difference in our times for St. Louis. So while the league itself has gotten better about the afternoon starts, St. Louis has still mostly 7:30. And I think we're going to see that across the league. 7:30 local times are still the default start time, but you're getting some of these single game windows opening up to make it possible to watch more MLS in addition to your home team live. So St. Louis will have 1 8 p.m. home start. They will have 11 7:30 p.m. home starts, 2 6 p.m., 1 3:30 p.m., 1 1:30, and 1 1 o'clock. That's our home schedule. So if you're looking for school schedules as it relates to early in the season, it's a little better, and we don't have any of those late starts outside that 8 p.m. local. But I think I'm optimistic about this schedule overall. Our afternoon games at home come, for instance, June 14th. So a hot day, obviously, probably against LA Galaxy, Saturday the 14th at 3:30 p.m. Looking across the league, various start times at home come early in the season. So March 30th is our earliest home start time against Austin FC at 1 o'clock on a Sunday. And then Saturday, May 31st, the 1:30 p.m. home game is against the San Jose Earthquakes. So earlier in the season, we have our earlier start times. I like that. I like a little mixing it up a little bit and fewer midweek Wednesday matches. Now, the big unknowns on the schedule are going to be the US Open Cup and Leagues Cup, because we've heard rumblings of Leagues Cup being cut down to 18 MLS teams against 18 Liga MX teams. But the one thing we know about Leagues Cup is that there will be no break. In addition to spreading out the times during the week as the start times and kickoff times, there is no month-long break. Looking into July and August, when that break has been the past couple of years, you have matches regularly in July, the 5th, the 13th, the 19th, the 26th. You have matches regularly in August in MLS play, August 9th, 16th, 23rd, 30th. That month-long break is gone. We're going to return, or at least see Leagues Cup transition into a midweek, in-season type tournament, like what US Open Cup has traditionally been, what the NBA is doing with their NBA Cup. Things that are proper for other soccer leagues in the world to do is include these throughout the season, while not taking a break outside of your periodic FIFA international breaks, which will be occurring, including the back part of the season, where October we play on the 4th and then the 18th because of a break. And then the decision day game is Saturday, October 18th at home against Real Salt Lake. Other things to note are, because San Diego has entered the league, we are playing twice against Sporting KC. That third game, where we'd been rotating home and away every other year, is gone. We now have a proper 15 teams in each conference with the arrival of San Diego. And so we'll be playing home and away against all Western Conference teams, and then a handful of Eastern Conference teams as well, including 3 new Eastern Conference foes at Philadelphia on March 22nd, versus the Columbus Crew April 13th, even though we've played them in Leagues Cup, and at Montreal, CF Montreal, September 13th. Exciting to get new Eastern Conference teams mixed in while keeping and adding to and rekindling-ish some of the teams that we've played already and locally in that. So Chicago, Nashville. It's nice to be able to play Chicago regularly every year, even if it's not a quote-unquote rivalry week game this year, it looks like. But it's also nice to add Nashville back in. Now, I am a huge proponent of more rivalry-focused matchups. So if there was a way to play Nashville and Chicago home and away every single year, I think that would be better for the league. One step further than that, I think ultimately, especially if the league continues to expand beyond 30, which they will eventually because the money will flow, I think the league needs to look at some different makeup as far as their conferences, their divisions, the alignment, and that mythical central division, central conference that could materialize up and down the Midwest of the United States. It's just ready-made at this point. And when you add more teams, you're going to run into an unbalanced schedule that almost requires you to rethink things and get further and further away from that true table format. There's just too many teams at this point to be able to do that. Extra games against San Diego. I've also heard rumblings that we did lose a Miami game because of San Diego. San Diego's getting a Miami home game, I believe. And so there were rumors going around that we were going to get a Miami home game this year, but that ended up going to San Diego with their cross Western Eastern Conference games. I don't know the validity of that, but that is rumor out there. And it's unfortunate. That's the only thing beyond not playing SKC that third extra time. The only other unfortunate thing is Messi's not coming to St. Louis. There's no chance at that. And this is probably the last year that would have been a possibility. So that's unfortunate. With Sporting KC, though, I don't like the fact necessarily that two things about SKC. I don't like the fact that we play them so soon together. We've seen this concept in the past few years with MLS in that they have teams playing each other within 4 or 5 weeks, where it's just the schedule is what it is from February to October, and you're playing the same team in such a short time period. And it's annoying, but it's frustrating when it's SKC and it's that rivalry, and we don't get to experience it spread out throughout the season. We get it on Saturday, April 5th in Sporting KC, 7:30 kickoff time. That's a Saturday. And then we get it again on Wednesday, May 14th at 7:30 p.m. at Energizer Park. And beyond the fact that we play them twice and we play them early, this is the most annoying part. MLS is touting this as St. Louis's rivalry week matchup, and they're making rivalry week during May a 2-match day experience type thing. And I just find it not even frustrating. I find it like a slap in the face to the rivalry that exists and to what we've made this with Sporting KC. The passion that the fans have shown, especially at Energizer Park, City Park, the past couple of years, and the value that brings optically to MLS, and them for them to give this to us on a Wednesday night in the school year still. I don't think school's going to be out by May 14th for most of the St. Louis area. And so you're looking at a school night in addition to it being a Wednesday against Sporting KC. It's frustrating, and it's a slap in the face to us as fans by the league. If you were going to make it a midweek match, do it during the summer. Do it when school's off. Think about these things a little bit more. Think about the impact to the communities, the impact to the fan experience when you're doing some of these schedules, or just move around rivalry week. Like, what is the purpose of rivalry week at that point in the season? You could choose to make it whenever you want. It just they've lost the plot entirely. Absolutely agree with Miles Sommer in the chat. School night, rivalry night, they don't mix. This was an awful decision by MLS, and it really sullies an otherwise pretty good schedule. I was overall happy with this until I noticed that, and it's all I can see at this point, and because it's frustrating. And to reiterate, one of the big things is that this is a night of celebration with your rivalry game. It's a night of the anticipation is amped up. Everybody's just on edge. And it's nice to be able to spread that out throughout the entire day. Supporter activities, tailgates, building up the anticipation to this game, having the club do different events and activities throughout Saturday as this extra extended time. And we can't do that. Our one chance now to do that in the regular season for this match against Sporting KC, and the league has said, no, you have to do it after work, after school, on a school work night on a Wednesday in May. I think I've beaten that dead horse enough, and it's just frustrating how that worked out. Some other notes on this schedule. Decision Day, Real Salt Lake, we host them on October 19th. No homestand or road trip is longer than 2 consecutive matches for this. And it's fascinating because we're not going to have to deal, it seems, with the midweek portion of that, the 2 Wednesday matches that are in May and June, along with this lack of a road trip or extended road trip, the lack of an extended homestand. It's kind of nice, I think, from knowing that you're not going to have a travel nightmare, really. So West Coast, back to East Coast, over to the West Coast, for instance. That's happened once or twice, and it's been really difficult on the team, the amount of travel. I don't think the team has performed well when they've had to do that. So those 2 things, the lack of midweek matches, meaning 3 matches in 8 days type of situations, the lack of those prolonged road trips, those are going to be good for, I think, the players themselves. We as fans probably don't care a whole lot because they're still going to be playing games and tuning in, going to games. But for players, this makes a difference. And so that's really nice to see. Away games, just if you were looking at when some of these away games and information are going to be, I looked in trying to see, so there's 14 away games and only 3 of them are on Sunday, no away games midweek for what that's worth. But then looking at the schedule itself, the teams on the field, and seeing where the most difficult part of our schedule is going to lie. Because logistically, I think we've hammered this home pretty in depth. But I look at June into July as being the most difficult stretch, and August into September as potentially being the easiest stretch, if you look at the teams we're playing and their performances relative to 2024. Now, some teams will fall off a cliff, kind of like St. Louis did in 2024 relative to what they did in 23. But at least from the get-go, what you can project, you're going to have different experiences. We know US Open Cup's going to introduce itself. We hope to participate in that this year. Leagues Cup is going to be there. It has also been rumored that teams that will be in US Open Cup are those that won't be in Leagues Cup and vice versa. If that ends up being the case, based on the performance of St. Louis in 2024, I would expect us to be in the Open Cup and not Leagues Cup, since we were 7th to last in standings in 2024 in the Supporter Shield. So that's an aside, because that will go into fixture congestion and what may make some of these runs a little more difficult. But as it stands now, just looking at the MLS schedule, June 8th, we play the Portland Timbers, and from there we go Timbers, Galaxy, Orlando City, Houston, Real Salt Lake, Timbers, FC Dallas, into Minnesota. Now, that 6-game stretch that bookends with Portland. So Portland away, LA Galaxy and Orlando at home, Houston and Real Salt Lake away, Portland at home. All 6 of those games are against playoff teams from 2024. And it's the longest stretch that we'll have on this schedule facing playoff teams from 2024. So as it stands now, I view that as the most difficult. And it's also coming with a midweek match in there. So in addition to difficult teams, you have 6 games in like 5 weeks. So that's the most difficult stretch to me. The easiest stretch based on performance from 2024 is going to be August 9th until about September 20th. In that stretch, you have Nashville at home, you have Chicago on the road, Vancouver on the road, Houston at home, FC Dallas at home, CF Montreal on the road, and San Jose Earthquake on the road. Playoff teams are few and far between here. You have Nashville, Chicago, FC Dallas, and San Jose Earthquake who missed the playoffs entirely. And then you have the Vancouver Whitecaps, CF Montreal, who barely squeaked in. The only proper playoff team, a top 7 team, is the Houston Dynamo. So there's a lot to like about that stretch, especially because of where it falls in the overall calendar. You're talking about transfer window capabilities. If whoever we sign in the summer window, they're going to be entering the team in this time period. So it gives them a little, at least as it stands now, lower quality teams to get ready for that stretch run. Because at the end of the season, you have LAFC at home, Austin FC on the road, and RSL at home. Those are the last 3 after that stretch. So there's a lot to like for me about not just our opponents, but when they're going to fall and the ability to really use that as a way to ramp up for a playoff push. Because as I'm sure we've all listened to Carolyn Kindle on City Voice recently, emphatically telling us that 2024 was unacceptable and that playoffs are a bare minimum here. This schedule kind of helps us, at least at face value, based on how the teams performed in 2024. Probably all going to change come mid-March when we start to see how these teams are actually performing and reset expectations. But at face value initially, I like this stretch from August into September, and I think it has a lot of potential. All right, let's talk about GAM. This is probably one of the last topics we'll have on the show before I get into any questions that might be in the chat. But I think this is a good news thing for me. In case you missed it, last week on December 19th, MLS actually did somewhat of the unthinkable. They published an allocation money breakdown of money available to teams in 2025, something they have never done before. And we thought they would never do because it was in their roster rules very specifically that they would not be making this public to protect the sanctity of teams, basically, to allow them to have competitive advantages in the marketplace, so to speak. It was never published how much GAM teams actually had. There are multiple ways to get GAM. There's multiple ways to spend GAM. There's ways in which you can make this work to enhance your salary. If you don't know what general allocation money is, it's basically made up money in the MLS ecosystem. There is a hard salary cap that exists in MLS of, in 2025, the hard salary cap will be $5.95 million. So as far as how much you must keep your roster in compliance with, you can only spend $5.95 million on your roster. Now that's the hard cap or soft cap, depending on how you look at it. But there are ways to get around that. Designated players, GAM, U22s. These are the weird roster mechanisms that we talk about, and this is why they're important. Because you actually have St. Louis City SC spending in the double-digit millions of dollars on player salaries and player acquisition costs, even though the salary cap is $5.95 million. GAM is one of the reasons you can do that. You get the 3 designated player spots. You get U22 spots where you can pay these players more than the max individual budget charge of a player, which in 2025 is $743,750. From a bookkeeping perspective, players cannot cost more than that. But if they're a DP, you can pay them more than that. You can acquire them for whatever, and they hit the books at that amount. Say for U22s, they hit the books at $200,000 or $150,000 depending on age, and you can acquire them for whatever. So we have I have a pretty good breakdown for you in just a second. But the whole point of GAM is that it's an additional bucket of money that MLS gives teams every year. In 2025, it's $2.93 million, little over 50% of the actual salary cap, in which teams can use it for uh, trading with other teams in MLS to acquire international roster slots. They can use it to offset costs related to acquiring players. They could use it to buy down salaries. So if a player makes, let's say, $600,000, and in order to fit them in their budget, they only have room for a $400,000 player, you apply $200,000 of GAM, and now from a bookkeeping perspective, that player only hits your books at 400,000. That's the kind of big purpose of GAM, is it allows you to pay players more than you otherwise would in this $5.95 million salary cap, but they don't hit the books at that level. It's just paying more. It only makes sense in the world of MLS, and it's not applicable in any of the other soccer leagues, any of the other sports leagues in America. But it's a way to keep the actual salary cap what it is. And it was always you. It sounds so bizarre nowadays in 2024 going into 2025, but it did serve a purpose at one time. It's arguable on whether it still does and what that purpose is, but it was a way for the league to have incremental growth while still ensuring the viability and survivability of their league in general. Because MLS has only been around for less than 30 years or 30 years now. So it was an important growth mechanism for the sport. But because they still have that around, now we actually have insight into how much money clubs actually have. That was always a black hole, and GAM doesn't expire. So this bucket of money that you get every year, $2.93 right now, $1 million in 2025, you get that. You get a similar bucket the previous each of the last 2 years for St. Louis, and we'll get another bucket every year. And so you can stockpile this. That's why you see GAM trades that include $2 million for some high value players. It's important to know who has GAM available, because then you, as a team, you know who you might be able to trade with in certain amounts. As a fan, I feel it's always been the big mystery when we talk about roster building. How much flexibility do we actually have in acquiring more players? Because we know bits and pieces of data up until now. We knew player salaries because of the MLSPA. We knew roster designations because last year MLS finally publicized that, and you didn't have to guess or dig up a previous press release. We know who the DPs, the U22s are, the homegrowns. So we can piece together parts of the puzzle in how much money teams might have available. Now we don't. Now we have a bigger piece of the puzzle. We still have a few unknowns. Like, for instance, we don't know targeted allocation money availability. Yet another bucket of money that is given to MLS teams every year, but very, very much more targeted in its application. You can only use TAM, for instance, if a player makes or was acquired for more than that individual salary, $743,000. Thomas Ostrak is a TAM player because he makes about $800,000 a year. Joachim Nilsson's a TAM player. You know, those players who make above the $743,000, but less than max TAM, which is $1.743 million, just $1 million on top of that. Another rule in MLS that if you're over that amount, you have to be a designated player. So how does all this apply to St. Louis? Let's get rid of the definitions. Let's look at what we know from St. Louis and what I've been able to figure out. If you add up the roster of St. Louis City for a bookkeeping perspective, not what the players are actually making, but a bookkeeping perspective that you would need to apply GAM for because they're over the salary cap. That's what I'm looking at here, because I care less in this conversation, in this context, about what a player is actually making, like Marcel Hartl, Klaus, and Berkey. I don't care exactly what they're making. I care the fact that they are classified as designated players, and they will hit the books at a certain amount. And we can use that information to say, this is the amount of St. Louis's bookkeeping roster pay for 2025, and we know how much GAM they have. We know what the salary cap is, and we know how much GAM they're going to have to spend of that available amount, and how much they'll have left over. That's the exercise here, is knowing how much GAM St. Louis is expected to have left over after they apply it to their roster in 2025. So let's start with St. Louis has in available GAM as of right now, the recording of this, December 26th, $5.356579 million. $5,356,579. That is after the Jose Kojima selection by San Diego. So we got $50,000 in GAM from that. And it adds to what was reported to get that 5,356,579. That's how much GAM we have going into 2025. That is not how much GAM we will have in 2025 once we apply it to our roster to make it compliant. Like I said, the 2025 MLS salary cap is at 5,950,000. The total amount of money, bookkeeping wise, for St. Louis City's roster that I've calculated based on last year's roster, which the turnover was pretty minimal. So I use that as a base frame of reference. This is an estimate because of that. Like Jake Nerwinski was on the books. You didn't have Timo Baumgartel on the books. And so you're going to have a few differences there. Baumgartel came on a free. If his salary is similar to Nerwinski, then we're pretty close. That's why I feel pretty confident about this. So St. Louis, total roster spend that hits the books before applying GAM, 9,363,763. The way that I came up with this is we have 3 designated players that will hit the books at a total of 2.231 million. 5 TAM players, Leuven, Nilsson, Kessler, Teuscher, and Ostrak, that will hit the books at 3.718 million. 2 U22 players in Durkin and Jake Girdwood-Reich that will hit the books at $400,000. These are totals. And then the salaries of the 10 other senior rostered non-TAM or DP players is about $3 million, $3.013 million. Putting all that together, we will report out a roster spend of $9.363763 million. That's what we need to fit into this salary cap of $5,950,000. Applying GAM to that 9 million number to get it into that 5.95 million is what we'll have to do. And the amount of GAM that we're going to have to spend to make this roster compliant, as it stands now, because of what I mentioned with the slight roster changes, we have to apply $3,413,763 to that roster. So $3,413,763 of GAM will need to be applied to our roster to make it compliant. Once we do that, we have a round ballpark of $2 million in GAM left over. And that's a lot. That's a lot left over, and to be able to do certain things now. And it's also important to know that that will roll over. Anything not spent will roll over. So we're continuing to accumulate GAM. And the question is, how does this rank compared to other MLS teams? Now, I have not done the exercise across the board to figure out how much other teams are applying to their current roster. But I do know that right now, as it was reported, St. Louis had the third most amount of GAM in the entire league. So even more so than San Diego, who just entered the league and has gotten extra GAM because of the expansion team. We have not spent a lot of our GAM overall, or we've acquired some other GAM. You can acquire GAM not just in what the league gives you, but also in player acquisitions. So if you sell a player, let's say you sell Nico Gioacchini for $2 to $4 million, you can convert some of that into GAM. Now, it's changed over the past year or so, but as of right now, up to $3 million from eligible transfer revenue per year can be converted to GAM. That's significant. So in addition to St. Louis being in good position right now with their estimated $2 million of GAM left over after they apply GAM to the roster to make it compliant, you have the ability to continue to sell players. AZ Jackson was a big one this past year. Nico Gioacchini, the transfer window prior to 2024. You continue to have the pipeline moving out. You continue being able to convert transfer money into GAM. And this is going to continue to stockpile. And you can take advantage of that in acquiring players, in trading for necessary international slots, etc. So St. Louis is in a really good position here with all of this. And I think that is a really good reflection on Lutz Pfannenstiel, on John Hackworth, and just how well they've been able to manage the roster mechanisms of MLS. That was a concern coming into the league because Lutz had no experience with this kind of system. And so our low initial roster spend, I think, definitely helped. The Nico AZ sales definitely helped gather GAM. You also get GAM for missing playoffs. MLS gives you some money as almost a consolation prize. And other ways here and there, qualifying for Champions Cup. You had an allotment of GAM given for that. So St. Louis is in a good spot. They're going to be in a good spot this year as far as general allocation money goes. We'll have to wait and see on a big ticket item purchase, but something's probably coming at some point. And knowing that we have this available GAM puts us in a really good position of leverage and flexibility in if we find a player that we want to bring in, and maybe it's $500,000 more than what we would like to spend, we at least have the money if we have the desire to spend it. And that's kind of it for GAM. I think we've gone in depth into what this looks like. If you have any questions, feel free to hit us up at FlyoverFooty on X or Blue Sky, at Matt Baker STL on X or Blue Sky. Happy to answer any questions you might have on GAM, especially. We'll dig into it again next year because supposedly I've heard rumblings that MLS will also do some kind of an update after the roster lock date when the season starts to tell us how much GAM is actually being applied to each player, which would be truly tremendous. I mean, I'm honestly amazing stuff if we can put into practice exactly what I've been talking about here, where it's not just knowing that St. Louis has $5.356 million in GAM, and St. Louis will need to apply $3.413 million of that to the roster. It's knowing who it gets applied to, because I think you start to see value in players and like some of the nuances in how much TAM you're spending, how much GAM you're spending, and then using that to estimate how much TAM. Because we're getting closer to putting all the pieces together in how MLS teams spend their money. And I'm excited to go into 2025 with this extra knowledge. It's supremely helpful for us to be trying to piece together what our club has at their disposal. And it lets us have more intelligent arguments. One of the things that this can be a conversation starter with in the upcoming season is transfer windows. As we look to bring in players, as we look to fill the remaining gaps that we might have on our roster, we know the kind of flexibility we have. Not just the fact that we have one open roster slot right now. As it stands, we have 29 of our 30 roster slots taken. It's not just that, but knowing that we have this extra money in GAM, knowing that we have a couple positions of need, better conversations, more educated conversations that I think starts to get MLS and starts to get soccer in America on the level of baseball, basketball, hockey, and football, because you have much more transparency into the inner workings of that. You know what the salary cap is in baseball, you know what the luxury tax is, and all these kinds of things. MLS needs to be on that level. And if you're going to have these crazy rules, the only way to get that on that level with the rules is to make it more transparent. And so that's what we have kind of now. Before we get out of here, I'm going to go through and see if we have any kind of chat questions before I go. And I do see Daniel Gavura. What's your thoughts on more signings coming, or do you think we go into the preseason with our roster as is? Well, with 3 new players selected in the Super Draft that are not signed, we have 29 players under contract going into 2025. I don't think that tells me we can't sign other players, because when Lutz Pfannenstiel gave his interview to the City Voice podcast, I think he mentioned 3 to 4 possible positions he was looking at, or 3 to 4 players. And that number does not line up with the amount of roster slots we have available. I would estimate that 1 or more players will be sold before the season kicks off. We will probably go into preseason pretty set as is, because preseason starts, or at least the report to training camp starts early January. Not a lot of time to move at that point. I've said before, I think it's likely that one of Kyle Hebert or Josh Yaro moves on, whether it's sold for Hebert, maybe a Canadian team. Yaro still might sign with San Diego. I've heard that as there's no real truth to that, is what I've heard, but you never know what might happen. We're very full at center back. And if you're going to bring in a player at a position of need, whether it's defensive midfielder or another attacking winger, center back is the place to pull from. So I think we probably will see 1 or 2 more moves if Lutz has his way, but not until January. And then we'll probably see a few outgoing players as well. The other thing that we don't really know is one of the most interesting storylines to follow in 2025 in January is going to be following our young players and what we end up doing with Caden Glover, Tyson Pierce, Miguel Perez, and Makai Joyner. Because two of those players, Glover and Joyner, make up our half of our striker room right now. Without oh my gosh, the super draft, Jaskelenin. I'm going to remember him. Without Jaskelenin signed right now, we have basically Klaus, Betcher, Glover, and Joyner. And so are you going to trust one or more of those players to be the depth at striker? Is Jaskelenin the answer? And if so, that's still another young player with no MLS experience. So watching what we do with them, if one or more goes out on loan, a season-long loan, or otherwise, will be interesting. Does Miguel Perez return from Birmingham, and where does he slot in? He didn't light the world on fire with Birmingham, and so what will his role be in St. Louis? And will it be with the first team in 2025, backing up Eddie Leuven, backing up Chris Durkin, something in the midfield? And is Tyson Pierce ready to take the next step for City? Tyson Pierce could be another option at right back. We talked about Joey Zielinski coming from Rutgers. We talked about Akil Watts possibly being Thomas Tottenham's backup. Jake Nerwinski could still be re-signed, but Tyson Pierce is out there, and he's played multiple positions, including the midfield and fullback. So is he going to remain on the roster as well? That's an important conversation for individually the players, but also anytime we send a player out on loan, that frees up another roster slot. And so if we send a couple more players out, then we can bring in a couple more impact players to start the season. That's the storyline for the new guys that I'm looking to follow. And I think it will impact our ability to sign and pull in new players. Yeah, I think Edgar Nags, our good friend from the LA Galaxy fan base, he's got a great podcast, News Across Galaxy. Y'all really don't want to have Miami invade your stadium. It's like a pink rash in the stands, and it'd be hard pressed to find anybody wearing a Miami kit that's not messy. We have Miami kits that are messy in St. Louis. I see kids at the elementary school my kids go to wearing Miami messy kits. I mean, I would love to see the greatest of all time, in my opinion, play live in person, because I haven't had that opportunity yet. But yeah, it would be a spectacle more than anything else. And while I'm on that subject, kudos to Minnesota United, who is welcoming Miami and will be playing at Allianz, and they're not moving to like US Bank where the Vikings play in the NFL. That's a good move, because Columbus Crew ripped Cleveland Crew, basically. The Columbus Crew ownership did the opposite. They moved one of their home matches to Cleveland to make it more of a spectacle for Miami, and you have a lot of angry Crew fans. And you know what angry Crew fans are capable of, and apparently that's something that they thought was a risk worth taking. No other comment on that other than I'm glad that we are not in that boat with the Columbus Crew as far as that goes right now. That's it for us here on Flyover Footy. I think that'll do it. We're going to wrap things up. So thank you so much for joining us. The 2024 Flyover Footy season has come to an end. We really appreciate, on behalf of Phil, Stu, Santi, I appreciate you guys so much for listening, tuning in to the live stream. It was such a random time around the holidays right now, but I wanted to get something out because, there's still news to talk about. I felt like I wanted to wrap a bow around 2024 with this last few bits of things. And I just wanted to thank you all for listening, letting us talk about our favorite subject, soccer in St. Louis, and specifically St. Louis City SC, is a joy. It's a blast to do this as often as we get to do it. On behalf of those other guys, Phil, Santi, and Stu, we're forever grateful for being able to do this. 2024 has been a heck of a year. We have big things planned for 2025. Cannot wait for the most exciting season so far to kick off for St. Louis City. We'll be back with all of our coverage 2-3 times a week whenever we can, and keep bringing you all the news that we're able to with St. Louis City. The club is a more of an open book than I think I ever imagined, as far as their ability to open for guys like us who do this as a passion project and just want to bring this news, want to make more visibility around St. Louis, and do everything we can to spotlight the club in conjunction with the legacy, the standard media. And I think it's just a great community that we've built in St. Louis on the supporters level, on the fans level, and on the media level. The other podcasters do a fantastic job around here, and we are just blessed to be in that conversation with all of them. Everybody has their own flair, their own unique personality, their niche, their takes on things, and we're just happy to be in the room. So we will be back early in the new year as training camp starts, as the fresh season begins. And until then, enjoy the rest of the holiday season. Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, and Happy New Year. Until 2025, go City. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in on the live stream. Really appreciate it. Have a great, rest of the week. Have a great time in between the holidays. If you're off work, enjoy yourself, enjoy the time with family, and let's keep the conversation going. Keep it positive wherever you do it online, Facebook, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, everywhere. We have one of the best communities. I love interacting with other communities like Edgar. Thank you so much for joining us on the live stream. I can't wait to have more guests and more other fan based podcasts throughout the league, helping us preview teams in 2025. It's just going to be so much fun. So thank you. Happy holidays. Talk to you later.